A clock does not fear its own stopping. It simply stops. Somewhere in the gap between the clock and the man who reads it, the terror of an ending that knows it is coming was invented. Consider the error hiding inside that terror. We treat the ending as the wound, but a wound implies a body that was whole before it. What if the ending is not a wound at all? What if it is the only thing that ever made the body whole in the first place? Take an object with no edge. A line drawn forever in both directions has no shape, because shape is what an edge produces. A circle is beautiful because it closes. An infinite line is not beautiful. It is not anything. It simply continues, indifferent to whether you are watching. This is the first mistake in how we grieve our own finitude. We imagine that more line would mean more shape. It would not. It would only mean more line. So the question is never really, how do I get more? The question hiding underneath is what closes around what I already have and makes it a shape instead of a smear. Here's where the culture offers its two counterfeit answers, and it is worth naming them as counterfeits before we go any further. The first counterfeit says, hoard sensation. If the line must end, fill every inch of it with pleasure, because pleasure is the only currency that cannot be taken from you retroactively. This sounds like wisdom. It is actually a form of panic dressed as philosophy. A man who spends 40 years accumulating pleasant afternoons has not defeated death. He has simply agreed not to think about it in exchange for a steady supply of distraction. The counterfeit is convincing because pleasure is real, but a life made only of pleasant afternoons has the same problem as the infinite line. It has no edge, no shape, nothing that could be called, afterward, a story. It is a smear of contentment, and smears do not survive being remembered. The second counterfeit says the opposite. Refuse pleasure, chase magnitude. Write the book that outlives you. Build the thing that keeps your name in circulation after your mouth has stopped making sound. This one is more seductive because it borrows the vocabulary of meaning rather than the vocabulary of comfort. But look at what it actually promises. It promises that if enough strangers in enough rooms after you are gone say your name, then somehow the terror is answered. Examine that promise closely, and it dissolves. The strangers are not you. Their memory of you is not you continuing. It is a rumor about you continuing, and rumors do not require a rememberer at all, let alone the one who is being remembered. You cannot borrow comfort from an event you will not be present for. This is not immortality. It is a very elegant form of absence, decorated to look like presence. Both counterfeits share a hidden premise, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Both assume that the self is trying to defeat the ending. Fill the line or extend the line, either way, the strategy is to argue with the shape of the thing. There is a third position, and it does not argue with the ending. It uses it. Think of a sentence. A sentence has no meaning while it is being spoken. Meaning arrives only at the full stop, when the shape becomes visible all at once and the mind can finally hold the whole of it. Cut the sentence off early and it degenerates into fragment, let it run forever, and it degenerates into noise. The period is not the enemy of the sentence. The period is the thing without which there would have been no sentence at all, only an unbounded string of words, meaning nothing, because meaning requires a boundary to mean within. This is the actual relationship between a life and its ending, not enemy and victim, author and page edge. The ending is not what interrupts the meaning. The ending is the condition under which meaning becomes legible, which changes the real question entirely. It is not, how do I get more sentence? It is not even, how do I make sure people quote my sentence after I've stopped speaking it? It is, given that this sentence will end exactly where it ends, what shape am I willing to let it take? This is a harder question than either counterfeit offers, because it cannot be outsourced to accumulation. You cannot answer it by adding pleasant afternoons, and you cannot answer it by adding admirers. You can only answer it the way a sentence is actually built one clause, committing to a direction the previous clause opened, refusing the branches that would have made the shape blurrier, until there's a shape at all, and it is legible, and it is yours, and it will stop being written, and that stopping is not a cruelty done to it. It is the punctuation that lets it have been a sentence. There is an old superstition that says the wise man makes peace with death by no longer wanting anything. This essay makes no such claim and does not think it is true. Wanting is not the problem. The problem was always the shape of the wanting, the belief that the self is in a contest with the edge of its own page and must either fill the whole page or escape it. Neither is available. Neither was ever the task. But an objection arrives here, and it deserves to be taken seriously rather than waved off. The objection says, fine, the sentence needs a period, but surely a longer sentence, all else equal, can hold more clauses, more turns, more of what the mind was trying to say. Why insist that length is irrelevant when clearly a haiku and an epic are not interchangeable? The objection is right about something and wrong about something, and the two should not be allowed to blur together. It is right that length is not nothing. A clause cut off before it commits to anything is not a tragedy of brevity, it is simply unfinished. And unfinished is a real defect, not a poetic one. So, let it be said plainly, there is no case being made here for shortness as a virtue in itself. That would only be the first counterfeit wearing a monk's robe instead of a hedonist's. But the objection is wrong to think that this settles the matter in favor of length, because the epic is not better than the haiku by virtue of being longer. It is better, when it is better, because everything in it is doing work, because nothing in an epic worth reading is there merely to extend it. The moment a sentence or a stanza or a chapter exists only to postpone the ending rather than to build toward it, the length has stopped being size and started being padding. And padding is not more life. Padding is the first counterfeit again, still panicking, now wearing a longer robe. So the real measure was never duration at all. It was density of commitment, how much of what appears on the page is doing the work of building a shape, versus how much is simply occupying the space between now and the period so that the period arrives later. A short life dense with commitment can outmean a long life thin with postponement. This is not a comforting slogan invented to make brief lives feel acceptable. It is closer to an arithmetic fact about what meaning actually is. Meaning is not a quantity you accumulate by existing across more time. It is a ratio of what committed to a direction over what merely occurred, which raises the darker version of the objection, the one that actually stings. Suppose the sentence is cut off, not at a natural close, but in the middle of a clause, a life ended not old but early, before the shape it was building had finished declaring itself. Is this not a genuine loss, unanswerable by any talk of density or ratio? It is worth refusing here the temptation to resolve this too neatly, because most easy resolutions are dishonest. The honest answer is that an interrupted clause is a real cost, and no reframing removes that a sentence stopped mid-thought is, among the things it can be, unfinished. And unfinished is worse than finished, all else equal. What can be said, and it is not nothing, is this: an unfinished clause is not the same category of thing as no clause at all. A fragment that was building toward something, however abruptly halted, still discloses direction the reader, or the mourner, can see where it was going even without arriving. This is a thin consolation, and it should be offered as a thin one. It does not erase the cost of the interruption. It only distinguishes the interruption from the void, which is a different and lesser kind of tragedy than the ones the counterfeits were built to avoid. Return then to the two counterfeits, now visible in sharper light. The hoarder of pleasant afternoons was never wrong to want the afternoons. He was wrong to think that stacking them, rather than letting them build toward anything, was the same as writing a sentence. He produced volume without direction the infinite line again, just a shorter, more comfortable segment of it. And the builder of legacies was never wrong to want his work to matter beyond the room he set it in. He was wrong to think that the mattering required spectators who would still be alive to notice it. The work can commit to a direction, can close into a shape, entirely inside the span of the one life that made it, and whether or not anyone afterward remarks on the shape changes nothing about whether the shape was actually achieved. A sentence is not incomplete because the room empties before someone reads it aloud. It was already complete, or it wasn't, the moment the last clause closed, which is, in the end, the entire correction being offered here. Not care less about your life because it ends. Not care more about your life in order to defeat the ending, either by filling it or by outlasting it. But notice that the ending was never the enemy of the caring in the first place. It was the thing that made caring a coherent activity at all the boundary, without which how should I live would not even be a question worth asking, because there would be no shape for the answer to take. The task was only ever the sentence. Write toward the period. Do not write to avoid it, and do not write to survive past it. Write so that when it arrives, and it arrives regardless of what you decide about it, it closes around something rather than around nothing at all.